everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, which has been variously called An Evening of Owls and Owls of Newfoundland. Same basic idea either way. We're starting a little bit late, so I think people are still trickling in, but we're just going to get going. So thank you for all coming tonight. This is, I hate to show favoritism here, but this is my favorite webinar because I do really, really love our owls. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Catherine Dale. I'm the coordinator of the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. And with us also tonight is Jenna, who is the assistant coordinator. We are both apparently called Birds Canada Atlantic right now, but we are different people, I assure you, in different provinces. Jenna is going to be keeping an eye on the chat and answering some of your questions as we go along. And as always, there'll be time for questions at the end, and you can feel free to type them in the chat or ask them out loud. Just unmute yourself. I will warn you all, things may be a little rocky tonight because I'm literally about 4 hours off a plane. So we'll see how this goes. So both Jenna and I work for an organization called Birds Canada. And I know that many of you may have heard of Birds Canada before, but for those of you who haven't, we are Canada's voice for birds. So we're the leading science-based bird conservation organization in the country. And our mission, as you can see there, is to drive action to advance the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of wild birds and their habitats. And the main way we do this is through citizen science. So again, a term that probably many of you are familiar with, but for those who aren't, we're talking about people exactly like you, so that the public contributing to scientific data collection. And so our programs, we have a lot of different volunteer programs where people go out, record their bird sightings, and submit them to our database. And each year, more than 70,000 volunteers participate in our programs across Canada, which is a number that always blows my mind. So this is a slide just to talk a little bit about what some of those programs are. And these are citizen science programs that we offer from our Atlantic office. Only 2 of them are currently offered in Newfoundland. But as you can see, they vary widely in terms of the level of bird skills you need to participate, and also the level of fitness you need to participate. So they vary from things like Project Nest Watch, which is really as simple as it sounds. If you see a bird's nest, if, for example, a robin is building a nest over your cabin door, you can keep an eye on that nest, monitor the timing of it, how many birds fledge from it, whether it's successful or not, and you can submit all that data to Project Nest Watch. So really you can do that for any bird, so you really only need to be able to identify one species, whatever you're seeing build a nest, and you really don't need any fitness at all necessarily. And then on the other end of the range, we have the Maritimes Marsh Monitoring Program, which requires kayaking, hiking, sometimes wading through marshes, hopefully not swimming, but you never know, and being able to identify all the birds that you see and hear. And of course, as will be frequently mentioned tonight, we are more likely to hear most birds than we are to see them, so it requires a lot of birding expertise. The programs with stars are those where long-term involvement is preferred, and that's because, of course, your skills as a volunteer grow the longer you participate. And so the more experience you get, the more you recognize the birds, the more information you're able to collect, the better you get at collecting that information. Here in Newfoundland, as I said, we currently have 2 programs. One is the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas, which if you've been coming to these webinars, you've heard mentioned many times. This is a 5-year citizen science effort to map the distribution and the abundance of all the species of birds that breed on the island of Newfoundland. Obviously, this is a big island. It's not something we can do without help, so we're always looking for volunteers to participate in this program. And the map you can see there, the little map of Newfoundland, is our breeding evidence for the great horned owl. Our other program, which we'll be talking much more about tonight, is the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey. And that is also a citizen science-based program, but it's a roadside survey. So each spring, beginning April 1st and ending May 15th, we have volunteers go out to a predetermined route of 10 stops and survey those stops for all the owls they hear and see. So we'll talk a lot more in detail about how that works later, but keep in mind that even though it may still seem like winter or some kind of very wet spring situation, the 1st of April is indeed coming up. So we are really actively looking for volunteers for the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey right now. Before we go any farther, I'd just like to give a brief land acknowledgement. So the lands where we conduct the Breeding Bird Atlas and the Nocturnal Owl Survey are the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose people have been erased forever. Additionally, the island of Newfoundland is the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people. These people have been protecting and stewarding the land here since time immemorial, and that's an effort that we hope to contribute to with the Breeding Bird Atlas and the Nocturnal Owl Survey to help protect the species that we all share the island with. And of course, I also want to mention the sponsors and partners in the Atlas in particular, but also the Nocturnal Owl Survey. So both of these are huge projects, and we would not be able to accomplish them without the support of all these organizations. And for the Owl Survey, I particularly want to highlight the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, who have provided some of the financial support to get the Newfoundland Owl Survey going, and also the Public Engagement Office of Memorial University, who have provided the funding for these owl talks and owl outreach efforts. So tonight's talk, we're going to do a little bit of an intro to owls because owls are just fun to talk about. We are then going to talk about Newfoundland and Labrador's owl species, and I'm just curious, put it in the chat. How many owl species do you think we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador? Anybody have guesses? I've got the chat open, so I'm looking. Any guesses? Silence. Okay, I've got a 6, I've got a 5, 4, 4, a lot of 4s, 6, 3, 5. You're all in the right ballpark. As it happens, 6 is the right number. However, when you're talking about breeding owl species, 6 is the right number only if you include Labrador. So we have 5 owl species that breed in Newfoundland, and then a 6th owl species that breeds in the province. We're going to talk, as I said, a little bit about the Nocturnal Owl Survey and how it works in case people are interested in participating. We're going to talk about why we do the Nocturnal Owl Survey. So what information can be gained from the Owl Survey? And I think this is really kind of the exciting part because it's a really good example of what you can do with citizen science data. And then, of course, as always, we will end the webinar with a test. And this one is going to be an exclusively audio test. So keep your ears tuned. We'll be going through the different owl calls that you can hear in our province. Okay, so starting to talk about owls. We have 2 families of owls. They're both in the order of Strigiformes, and we have the Strigidae, which is the typical or the true owl family, and then the Titonidae, which is the barn owl family. And you can see the barn owl on the upper left there. He does look a little bit different than all of these other owls. For those of you who are wondering, these are not the owls of Newfoundland and Labrador. We've got a wide variety there, but I think it really does showcase the diversity we can get in owl species. So we've got about 250 species worldwide, 19 in North America, 16 in Canada, and then of course 6 in Newfoundland and Labrador. And these owl species can vary extremely dramatically in things like size. So the tiniest owl in the world is the elf owl. It is 5 to 6 inches tall, and it weighs about 1.5 ounces. And I was trying to figure out exactly what 1.5 ounces is, so I looked it up. That is about the same as 6 toonies. So if you've got $12 in your pocket in coins, that's how much an elf owl weighs. In contrast, our largest North American owl, at least in appearance, not in weight, is the great gray owl, and that's up to 32 inches tall. So that's about 6 times as tall as the elf owl, and those guys have a wingspan of 60 inches. Of course, owls also show a lot of variation in behavior. We tend to think of them as being nocturnal birds, but as you'll see during the talk today, some of them are active during the day, some of them are active at dawn and dusk, and depending on the species, they can hunt anything from insects to small reptiles and amphibians, fish, birds, other owls, so all kinds of different things. However, having said things about owl diversity here, I want to talk briefly about what sort of all owls share. And of course, the first thing we all think of, probably because of those enormous eyes they have, is their vision. So owls have extremely large eyes. It's not just our perception. So owls' eyes can be 3% of their body weight. So if you've got a 150-pound human, that would be, oh, I figured this out. It's something like 3 pounds of eyes, which is crazy if you think about it. In comparison, our eyes account for about 0.0003% of our body weight. Owl eyes also have a lot of rods. So if you think back to high school science, you probably remember your teacher talking about different types of cells in the eyes. So we have cones and rods. Our cones are responsible for color vision, and our rods are responsible for visions in low light. And so it makes sense that owl eyes would have a lot of rods. They also have binocular vision, again, like us. So they've got those two eyes on the front of their head. And if you think back to some of our other presentations, particularly maybe the shorebird presentation, you'll notice that that contrasts with a lot of other birds, which have the eyes on the side of their head. That's really, really good if you are prey, basically, because you can basically almost see behind you. You want to be able to look out for what's coming. But owls, on the other hand, are more often predators than prey. And so because their eyes are positioned on the front of their head and facing forward, they have really great binocular vision. So they see objects with both eyes at the same time, and that improves their depth perception and helps them with hunting. They are, however, farsighted, so they actually use bristles around their bill to help them detect close objects. The other thing about owl eyes is that they're really long and kind of tube-shaped, and they're held in place by bony structures in the skull called sclerotic rings. So you can see that a little bit in the diagram of the owl skull there. So these sclerotic rings mean that the owls can't roll their eyes from side to side the way that we can. Their eyes really only look straight ahead and don't move more than about a degree. And because they can't roll their eyes the way that we do, they actually have to move their entire heads around to get a good look around. So they frequently twist and bob and weave their heads to expand their field of view. And they can actually turn their necks about 270 degrees in either direction without moving their shoulders, which is definitely more than us, even those of us who do yoga on a regular basis. Something else we tend to think of when we think about owls is really good hearing. So they hear very, very quiet sounds, and they have an amazing 3D ability to pinpoint prey under snow or leaves just by sound. So part of the reason they have such good hearing is they've got that round facial disc, and you can really see that on all owl species. So good example in the snowy owl there, but it's common to all owl species. And essentially it acts like a parabolic dish. So it focuses the sound towards the ears. They hear in both ears like humans, but unlike us, they have asymmetrical ears. So the left ear is typically positioned lower than the right and also not in line in the vertical plane. And so because they're asymmetrical, it actually generates a tiny amount of separation between when a sound hits one ear and when it hits the other ear. So there's a little bit of a difference in time, very, very small, but that actually helps the owl pinpoint the source of the sound in space in a way that we can't do with our symmetrically placed ears. And then I think the final characteristic that really stands out about owls, at least to me, is silent flight. So owls are amazingly silent flyers. Most birds, you'll hear the flap of their wings. You'll actually hear the turbulence of the air going over their wings. And of course, the larger the bird, the more you're going to hear them, the louder they are. So for an example, in the field a couple of years ago, I was just finishing up a survey. I heard a flap, flap, flap directly over me, looked up, and there was a heron. Heron is a big bird, was extremely audible. On the other hand, every single time an owl has flown over me, I've been struck by just how silent it is. And this is for quite a few reasons, actually. Their feathers are perfectly adapted for silent flight. So first of all, on the leading edge of the wing, they've got these comb-like serrations, which break up the air turbulence that typically creates the swooshing sound of flight. So it breaks up the air, and then the small streams of air are even further dampened by a unique texture of the owl feathers. So they're very, very velvety, and it kind of absorbs the sound. And then finally, on the back of the wing, and this is what you can see in the diagram there, you've got a soft fringe, which also helps to absorb the sound. So all of these features together streamline the airflow and absorb the sound that's produced, and basically make them extremely well adapted for silent flight. Owls also have quite large wings, typically relative to their body size, and that lets them fly slowly and do a lot of gliding. So these sound dampening structures obviously didn't evolve by chance, and there are a couple of reasons why owls might want silent flight. And the first one that people usually think of is that they need to sneak up on their prey. They don't want their prey hearing them coming. And this is called the stealthy hunting hypothesis. So the prey, they don't hear them coming, they have less time to escape. Makes a lot of sense. But if you think about it the other way, if you're hunting something, you want to be able to hear the prey. You don't want your own sounds to dampen or to muffle the sounds of what you're looking for. So for example, when I'm puffing up a hill in Newfoundland, there could be a bear walking in the bush right next to me and I wouldn't hear it over my extremely loud panting. Owls, on the other hand, want to be as silent as possible in order to hear the prey. And obviously, this is called the prey detection hypothesis. Obviously, these hypotheses aren't mutually exclusive. Both are likely true. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what joins all owls together. Now we're going to talk about the Newfoundland and Labrador owl species. And you'll see, I'm sure, those of you who are counting the owl species here, that I have only put 5 on the slide. Can anyone guess which owl species I have left off the slide? Answers in the chat again. Which Newfoundland and Labrador breeding owl species did I not include on this slide? Okay, we've got a snowy, we've got a great gray, Labrador owl, that's a good guess. Got a couple more snowies. Those of you who said snowy owl are indeed correct. So the snowy owl is not here because largely it's a Labrador breeder. Sadly, we do not have great gray owls in Newfoundland. That would be very exciting, but they're not here. Okay, so we are going to start with our largest and at least formerly most common breeding owl species in Newfoundland and Labrador. And this is the great horned owl. And this guy is essentially your stereotypical owl. So when people tell me they saw an owl or they heard an owl, this is usually what I'm guessing they're talking about. So these guys are quite large. They're strictly nocturnal. They roost in trees and they hunt along forest edges and meadows. So they're really good at hunting in open country. They're very impressive predators. So they are capable of killing things like hares and porcupines, although they're not killing porcupines in Newfoundland and Labrador. But they can also take down raptors and they do hunt other owls. So, oops, hang on, we're skipping the great horned owl details. The big cue for great horned owls in Newfoundland and Labrador is the size. There's just no other owl that is the size of a great horned owl. So very large owl, stocky build. The other thing is those really obvious ear tufts. And I really should say ear in air quotes. They are not indeed ears. They are actually display feathers. They have bright yellow eyes and they've got a nice white throat, which you can sort of see there, although this guy is squinching his head down into his throat. The back is a mottled grayish and the chest and belly are barred. These guys also sing what we think of as a stereotypical owl song. So it's a deep hooting and basically what they say is, "Who's awake? Me too." And once you've heard that in their call, you can't unhear it. So I'm going to play it now and hopefully I've managed to share my sound successfully. Jenna, if I haven't, let me know. So I'll play that once more. And not hearing anything from Jenna, I will assume that that was played successfully. The male and female great horned owls will actually sing duets. So you can hear these guys singing back and forth to each other. They'll alternate calls and the females will actually have a higher pitched voice than the males. So here's an example of 2 of them singing back and forth. So that's kind of a fun sound to hear when you're out. And that is something that I have heard on the owl survey. So it's always exciting. And then finally, owls can also scream. Great horned owls will scream when they're defending the nest. They are very ferocious defenders of their nest. And so this is what that can sound like. Now I have to say, to me, that sounds more like a very angry chicken than anything. However, that is a great horned owl scream. These guys start breeding very early in the winter, and you may wonder why we do our nocturnal owl survey so early. It's because owls are among our earliest breeders. And so while we're surveying for other breeding birds in the summer, we actually want to survey for these guys earlier in the winter. Great horned owls may already have chicks. So we'll go from our biggest owl to our smallest owl. And what may now, although we're still not sure, but it may actually have replaced the great horned owl as our most common owl species, which is a bit of a surprise because these guys, the northern saw-whet owl, are newcomers to Newfoundland. So if you look at a range map of the saw-whet owl, it will show that they aren't even found in Newfoundland. We have our first breeding evidence for the saw-whet in 2017, and they are just exploding across the island. So they are picked up on many, many of our survey routes, and this is something we're really interested in, the fact that we are catching this range expansion for saw-whet owls. So these guys are a little bit less fussy about habitat. So they can be seen close to urban areas, and there was even a pair breeding in the St. John's Botanical Gardens a couple years ago. They like areas with different forest ages and often open understory for foraging. Like the great horned owl, these guys are strictly nocturnal, but unlike the great horned owl, they are cavity nesters. So they nest in, for example, abandoned woodpecker holes. They'll also use nest boxes. So identifying cues for the saw-whet owl. Very small owl. They have a very large head. They have yellow eyes and kind of a compact little body. If you look at the facial disc, you'll see that it almost blends into the rest of the head. So there's really no border around the edge of their facial disc. They have that bright white V between the eyes, and then their forehead has stripes on it. And then you've got broad brown streaks on the breast and belly. And then on the back, even though you can't see it terribly well in this image, it's a brown back, but with white braces. So they've got sort of these white stripes or suspenders on the back of them there. Also pay attention to the color of the bill. So you'll see that the bill of the saw-whet owl is dark. The call that saw-whets make is probably not something you'll think of as an owl. So it's an insistent series of whistled notes, pretty much at the same pitch, and it's given at a rate of about 2 notes per second. So people say they sound a little bit like radar, or personally, I think they sound like a very tiny truck backing up in the forest. And their song is actually where they get their name, because people originally thought it sounded a lot like a blade being sharpened on a whetstone. So I will play this for you now. So it's a very distinctive call, as you can hear. It is very cute call, but it probably won't surprise you to know that it can also get quite annoying after a while. And a couple years ago, I was doing an owl survey, which involves playing saw-whet owl playback for about 30 seconds. And I was doing it right at the edge of St. John's on a road where houses kind of met the forest. And so we were standing there playing the saw-whet owl song, and we had a couple people come flying out of their house, looking a little bit angry with us, and come running over us to demand what we were doing. And I explained that we were doing an owl survey, and they said, rather again in a kind of annoyed fashion, well, you need to stop doing that in our backyard at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I had to explain to them that that was not us. That was in fact an actual owl, who was definitely frustrating them quite a bit, I would say. So we'll move from the saw-whet to our next small owl species. So boreal owls are a little bit bigger than saw-whet owls, but not a lot. I think we're talking about 8 inches and 10 inches tall. And these guys occupy a very similar niche to the northern saw-whet owl. So they are also cavity nesters. They'll breed in tree cavities and sometimes boxes. Both species have largely eat small mammals, some birds, some insects. These guys, however, aren't so likely to be found near an urban area. They really like boreal forest for breeding, and they're generally most active right after dark. And an interesting note, I saw there was a question in the chat about whether males and females look alike, and they do, but there's often a size difference, particularly, this is common to a lot of raptors, but it's particularly pronounced in the boreal owl, and it's not in the direction you probably think. So boreal owl female is actually much larger than the male. They show the most extreme difference in sexes of any American owl, so the female can be as much as 2 times heavier than the male. So the identifying cues for the boreal owl, unlike the striped forehead of the saw-whet owl, here we've got a spotted forehead. You'll see that there is a frame around the facial disc, but it is broken. So it's a brownish black frame, but it's got a lot of white dots breaking it up. Unlike the dark bill of the saw-whet owl, here we have a sort of ivory gray bill. We've got not just streaks, but brown spots as well on the breast and the belly. And then, like the saw-whet, we do have white spots on the back, but we don't have them concentrated in those braces or suspenders. So they're just kind of everywhere. And it's very difficult to find good pictures of nocturnal owls, so this is the best I can do. You can see one row of white dots at the bottom of the boreal owl's tail there. There are 2 other above. So boreal owls have 3 rows of white dots, 3 horizontal rows of white dots on their tail. So the boreal owl's song is also a series of low whistled toots, but they get progressively louder. So it's not the same even pitch and timing as the saw-whet owl's song. So male boreal owls will sing until they find a mate or until the female starts nesting, and then they decrease their song frequency. So I will play the boreal song for you now. So you see, again, it's not that same monotonous beep, 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 beep that you get with the saw-whet owl. These guys, I should mention, are also a great deal rarer than saw-whet owls. So you're much more likely to hear a saw-whet than you are a boreal. And we'll come back to that point towards the end of this talk. So those are our 3 nocturnal owl species. And if you participate in the Nocturnal Owl Survey, that's really what you're listening for. But we do have 3 other owl species. So first up is the northern hawk owl. So these are medium-sized owls. Oops, we're going to skip slides here. So they're medium-sized owls, larger than the boreals and the saw-whets, smaller than the great horned, and they are unusual for a number of reasons. So the big one is they are diurnal owls. So they detect their prey actually primarily by sight. They do have very keen hearing, and they can find prey under a layer of snow, but they are actually primarily diurnal owls. They've also got, as you can probably see here, a much longer tail than we usually see in owls. And that long tail, as well as their flight patterns. So they do a lot of flat glide, kind of, which Jenna talked about when she talked about raptors. This makes them closely resemble hawks, and obviously that's where they got their name. These guys do not like people. So they tend to live quite far away from cities and towns. They're found in tundra, boreal forest, near openings like bogs, burns, and cutbacks. But you won't find them hanging around botanic gardens in St. John's. So our ID cues for the northern hawk owl, like the boreal owl, we've got a spotted forehead, but those spots actually extend onto the crown. We have an unbroken black frame around the facial disc, so you don't see that it's broken up with any of those white dots. We've got yellow eyes and also a yellow bill. Again, like the boreal, we have brown back with white spots. But you'll notice instead of the streaks that we get in the saw-whet and the streaks and dots we get in the boreal, here we have barred underparts. So horizontal lines, not vertical lines. And then, of course, that extremely long pointed tail is an excellent cue, as is the behavior. If the owl is active and hunting during the day, it's probably a hawk owl. So for these guys, they do sing a really interesting song. Again, it's really probably not one you would commonly associate with an owl. The way that the association I've made to help me remember it is it sounds a little bit like frogs to me. Or I have a 1.5-year-old nephew, and he has one of these little pushing things with balls that pop in it as he pushes them around. And there's a sort of rolling, bubbly quality to their song that makes me think of that little toy. So I will play that for you now. So a truly unique sound. To me, doesn't really sound much like an owl, but it is very distinctive. These songs are more typically sung by males, and they usually last about 14 seconds. The males will sing while they're performing display flights. Females will also sing, but it's a little bit shorter and hoarser. And before we move on to our last two owl species, I just want to take a moment to highlight the differences between the saw-whet, the boreal, and the hawk owl. So with the saw-whet, remember, you've got a facial frame that blends in with the rest of its head. So you really don't have any sort of distinctive line there. With the boreal owl, you've got a dark frame that is broken up with the sort of white dots there. And in the hawk owl, you've got a bold black pattern. The saw-whet owl has a striped forehead. The boreal owl has a spotted forehead. And the hawk owl has a spotted forehead, but also a spotted crown. And then with the saw-whet owl, you've got vertical stripes on the underparts. Same thing with the boreal owl, but you've got horizontal barring on the hawk owl. And then, of course, there's that incredibly long tail. And my personal favorite cue is the color of the beak. If you can see it, you've got a dark beak on a saw-whet, sort of grayish ivory beak on boreal, and a yellow beak on a hawk owl. And you can always use the time of day when the owl is active. Okay, so our last two owl species. This one is definitely one of my favorites, the short-eared owl. So this is also called the grass owl. They are open habitat specialists. They like wetlands, open country. They love our coastal barrens. They have the unusual ability to hover while hunting. And these guys will forage during the day and the night, but they're actually most active at dusk and dawn. So they are what is known as crepuscular, which I think is probably one of biology's worst words. To me, it sounds like a symptom of a dread disease, but they are indeed crepuscular, most active at dusk and dawn. They cruise low over these open habitats. They look for voles and other small mammals, and these guys are ground nesters. So they don't need cavities, they don't need trees, they nest right on the ground. Identifying cues for the short-eared owl. Again, this is a medium-sized owl. You've got a rounded head, you've got a pale facial disc. You can see the short ear tufts in that one picture. You will almost never actually see these in the field. So again, these aren't actually ears. They are display feathers. They are very rarely up when you see the owls. So even though the owl is named after them, don't use those as an identifying cue. What I think is the best identifying cue is those yellow eyes with incredibly distinctive black rims. So you'll see all of that black shading around the eyes. And I think it was Jenna who said that short-eared owls look a little bit like a 90s grunge girl who forgot to take her makeup off before she went to bed. So out late partying, wakes up in the morning with a little bit of a raccoon eye going. And to me, that's a really distinctive cue and also just a fun thing to remember. They're buffy overall in color, and they have dark streaking and barring on both the back and the breast and stomach. The chest is more buff and has more streaking. The belly is whitish with less streaking. And the colors are actually a little bit like dried grasses, so they are surprisingly helpful for camouflage. You'd think an owl in an open area would stand out really well, but in fact, these guys can be quite hard to see. In flight, and this is most often when you see them, you'll notice those dark bars you can see on the underwing. So black feather tips, but then two dark bars. And those are really, really useful ID cues, especially since there is another bird species which you can confuse short-eared owls with, and we will get to that. These guys are not especially vocal, but they do sing. Because they are active during the day, you're kind of equally likely to see them or hear them. But the primary song, which I'll play for you, is a series of a dozen or more hoots, and it's given by males during the courtship flight, also sometimes from the ground or an elevated perch. So I'll play that. Again, I use all kinds of tricks to remind myself what birdsong sounds like. To me, short-eared owls sound kind of like I imagine monkeys to sound. So again, a hooting owl. like our great horns, but without that pattern. So remember, great horns are who's awake? Me too. Here you've just got an insistent series of hoots. Also, like great horns, these guys, both males and females, can bark, scream, or whine when they defend the nest. Again, like an angry chicken, but a smaller angry chicken this time. So a little bit more high-pitched than our great horned owls. I did mention that there's another bird that is very easy to confuse short-eared owls with. It is not one of our owls, it is one of our raptors, the northern harriers. So those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago may remember Jenna telling you about them. They love the same kind of habitat that short-eared owls do. So they really like open habitat. They hunt in the same way. They hover while looking for prey. How do you tell the difference between them? The northern harrier, for starters, has a longer tail, and both males and females, which are pictured there, have that really distinctive white rump. So the white rump is an excellent cue that you've got a northern harrier. The other thing is those dark wing bars on the short-eared owls. So the northern harrier male has dark wingtips, but it doesn't have those two distinct bars. And then the females, of course, look quite different, being more brownish. Okay, and we come to our last owl, and that is the snowy owl. So this is North America's largest owl by weight, although again, not by height. These guys show up irregularly in Newfoundland during the winter, and they breed in Labrador. So these guys will hunt in Newfoundland in sort of our wide open areas, the fields, the dunes, and they tend to come, they're what we call eruptive. So they move with food availability. And so when their typical prey, which is lemmings, is scarce in the Arctic, we get more of them coming south. And we'll see more of them in the winter. They are diurnal hunters, which is probably a good thing for them because if you breed in the Arctic and you're waiting for it to get dark to hunt your food, you're going to have a very long, very hungry summer. These guys are fierce protectors of their nests, and they will actually attack predators as large as humans or wolves. So these guys are serious about defending their nests. I don't have a slide showing field marks for this guy because it's a big white owl with yellow eyes. So there's really not much you can mistake a snowy owl for. I will say that males will range from pure white, like this guy, to white with a few brown spots. And then females and immatures are actually, they are white. Oh, okay, we're gonna get the owl call right now. Maybe we'll hold off on that just a bit, Mr. Snowy Owl. So the females and immatures have this dark barring that you can see here, but the face is always gonna be pure white. So the call of the snowy owls, both sexes will make this song or call, but it's particularly the males that are known for it. And they make low, very powerful hoots. They're often given 2 at a time. They can be as much as 6 hoots in a row. And the really cool thing about them is because it's such a low frequency sound, it travels really well in open areas like the tundra. So these hoots can actually be heard for up to 7 miles on the tundra, and the owls will often answer each other. So we'll go back to playing the snowy owl song now. Ooh. So low, much slower individual hooting. So those are our 6 breeding owl species in Newfoundland and Labrador. So now I just want to talk a little bit about the interaction between owls and people. I don't think I'm the only person who is totally fascinated by owls. I really think that they are very cool, and I think a lot of people find them fascinating because we associate them with being nocturnal, out when we're asleep. Their silent flight is awe-inspiring. They're large birds in many cases, and they've really long inspired fascination in people. So they're important often in mythology. In Greece, for example, they were the symbol of the goddess of wisdom, Athena, and considered a protector. So if an owl flew over Greek soldiers before a battle, they would take that as a sign of victory. Conversely, for some reason, in ancient Rome, they were actually symbols of death. This is often the case, again, because of their nocturnal habits. And so apparently the death of Julius Caesar was predicted by an owl, and owls were predicted to, or believed to predict failure on the field of battle. So you kind of wonder if it's the same battle these guys had, worked out for the Greeks, not so well for the Romans. Romans also apparently believed that witches could transform themselves into owls and suck the blood of babies. And I know I said that owls have diverse diets, but I promise you they are not out there sucking the blood of babies. Owls also play a really important role in English literature. Barn owls in particular had a very sinister reputation. So William Wordsworth and Robert Blair would use them as their bird of doom. And this is, again, probably because of their association with darkness and the association with darkness and death. So people are fascinated by owls. Owls, on the other hand, do not so much love people. A lot of our owl populations are experiencing declines for a number of reasons. So one of the biggest reasons is habitat loss. And I put forest loss, but it's not always forest. You know, we've talked about several open area owl species. When we break up the large tract of habitats, so a forest or a barrens, we can really cause problems for top predator species in particular because they depend on large areas of habitat. And so an example of this is the northern spotted owl in BC. Populations of this owl have been devastated by logging of old growth forest, and the species is actually now listed as endangered. Another threat to owls is climate change, as it is to many of our species today. Vehicle strikes are a surprisingly big problem for owls. I've had a number of people tell me in the St. John's area that they have hit solid owls in particular with their cars. And then poisoning is also often an issue, particularly if we are poisoning their prey. And the owl that I have put here on our slide is, of course, the short-eared owl. And that is, in fact, a species that's listed as threatened in Newfoundland and Labrador. And under our Federal Species at Risk Act, these guys are currently listed as of special concern, but are being considered for being uplisted to threatened. So short-eared owls are in trouble. So we do know that owl populations are declining, but in a lot of cases, we are missing information, particularly for our nocturnal owl species, because frankly, people don't come across them that often. So it's very hard to track what is going on with our nocturnal owl species. And that is where really focused surveys like the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey come in. So I promised more information. Here's the detail. As I said, it's a citizen science survey. It happens from the 1st of April to the 15th of May each year, and it's a roadside survey. So volunteers will take on a route, which you can see those routes represented by little markers there. The red markers are routes that have been adopted by someone. The green ones are routes that were available when the screenshot was taken several years ago. Each of those routes will have 10 stops along the roadside. Stops are about 2 kilometers apart. And what the volunteers agreed to do is on just one evening between the 1st of April and the 15th of May, they're going to go out, drive that route, stop at each of the 10 stops, and play a playback track that we provide, which is a mixture of silent listening periods and owl calls to try and generate responses from local owls. So the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey has actually been going on for more than 20 years. And some people love it so much they've been surveying their routes for more than 20 years. So we've had volunteers participating for the entire span of the program. I should note here that the owls we have on the edge there are actually maritime owl species. So there are species that we don't get there. On the top, we've got the barred owl. In the middle, we have the eastern screech owl, which is not confirmed to breed in the Maritimes, but has been picked up on a couple of owl surveys. And then on the bottom, the long-eared owl, which breeds in small numbers in the Maritimes. So for the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey, we have 20 years of data now. We are a little bit behind in Newfoundland and Labrador. So our survey was launched in 2018, and it was actually initiated by a grad student at Memorial University who was out doing some field work and thought that he could collect some data on owls at the same time. When we took over the survey in 2019, we had 35 routes. 33 of which were in Newfoundland, 2 were in Labrador. Unfortunately, we had 13 volunteers, which meant that many of our routes did not get surveyed. We actually had data from 14 routes. This graph is a little bit out of date, but you can see that our number of routes have been climbing quite a bit. So we started with our 35 in 2019. We did not do the survey in 2020 for probably obvious reasons to everyone. But in 2021, we had 57 routes. We had 67 in 2022, and clearly I need to add last year's to this. We're now at, I believe, 78 routes. This was the distribution of initial routes. You can see that we have maybe a few gaps on our island. There are also 2 in Labrador, and they were both in Happy Valley Goose Bay. This was, actually, I think this one is the 2022 map of routes. So you can see we've made some progress at covering some of those gaps. There are gaps that we will never be able to cover, and that is because for a roadside survey, you need 2 things. You need roads and you need people, and there are large swaths of Newfoundland where we have neither. However, I do think we're doing a really good job of expanding, and I am always looking to set up new routes, particularly in some of those under-surveyed areas. So if anyone lives in any of those areas and would like to contribute, please email me and we will set you up a route. And so this is how you would participate. So the first thing you would do is register for our survey on Nature Count. So there's an Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey page, and you would go to that, sign up for an account. Then you can use that to find and adopt a free route. And as I said, if there's no route near you, but you want to participate, then you can absolutely email me and we will see if we can set you up a route. And then it's always good to email me to express your interest anyway, because last year we did have a few people who weren't able to get out to survey their routes at the very last minute. So we do try and have somebody waiting to take it over. It's either that or I run around the island like a chicken with its head cut off or in early May and try to cover all the routes. The next step is to train and be prepared. So there's actually a training sound file. You're really only looking to be able to identify 3 owl species. So the great horned owl, the saw-whet owl, and boreal owl. But there are some other nocturnal sounds that you might hear. So we have a training sound file for you to practice on. And you can also use online resources like Merlin, for example, to practice your identification. There's also a detailed protocol guide available on our website. And then you're going to choose one evening between, as I said, the 1st of April and the 15th of May to do your survey. It's just one evening. It's not a large time commitment. It's about 2.5 hours on the evening you choose. The catch here is that it has to be a good weather evening. What do I mean by good weather? Well, we want it to be not too cold, by which I mean not below like -15. Owls are pretty hardy guys. In fact, I suspect they're around, but I don't want to be out surveying under -15. And it's not usually an issue in terms of temperature for the owl survey. That's something that's usually pretty manageable. However, we also need an evening where it's not raining, because that will interfere with detection and also not be great for the speaker. And then finally, and this is the big problem in Newfoundland, we need an evening where it's not windy. By not windy, I mean under 20 km/h wind. This is tricky in the spring on the island of Newfoundland for sure, but it is really important because the wind will affect your ability to hear owls responding to your the calls. So you pick your good weather evening, you go out, you conduct the survey, and then you either enter your data through the Nature Counts portal online, or you send it to me and I will enter it. And I'm happy to do that. It's mainly the surveying that Jenna and myself are not able to cover entirely. So just briefly to go through how you do the survey. This is an example of one of our routes. This is the one near Heart's Content, and you can see the 10 stops along the route there. For each one of these, we have a Google map available, so I can give you a link to that and you can follow that on your phone. We also loan out GPSs for people who would like coordinates to use to find their stops. And there's also a PDF available online. And then this is kind of what the survey looks like. So it starts with 2 minutes of silent listening, which you can see in the blue there. And those 2 minutes are really, really important because that is the only part of the owl survey which is standard across the country. And so when we're looking to compare results across the country, we have to rely only on those 2 minutes. The calls that are part of the owl survey vary from region to region because, of course, our species vary from region to region. But we always start with those 2 minutes of silent listening. Then our survey has about 30 seconds of boreal owl calls, followed by a minute of silence, and then repeat. And then about 30 seconds of northern saw-whet owl calls, followed by silence, and repeat that. We use our playback to increase our ability to detect owls. We're encouraging them to respond. However, the use of playback is also one reason that we only want people to do the survey one evening in our survey window. So just go out once. Playback is innately a little bit disruptive to birds. So by using the playback, we are making owls think that there is another owl on their territory. We have to get a permit to do this. So this is not something you can just go out and do on your own. It does disrupt them. However, the cost-benefit analysis, the information that we get by doing this once a year, we consider this acceptable disruption. But that's why we don't do it at other times. And so we really don't want to stress them out more than necessary. So as an example of what a survey might look like if you were having an extraordinarily good night, let's say you go out and we're interested not just in the species you hear, but exactly when you hear them, because that lets us do a little bit more with the data, like examining how different species respond to playback. So you're out at your stop, and at stop number 1, you have absolutely nothing happen during the first silent minute. Then in the second silent minute, you hear a great horned owl. So you would write great horned owl, or this is the code for them, GHOW, and you would put an X in the second minute because that's when you heard it. Let's say after the boreal owl calls, you hear both a great horned owl and a boreal owl. And that great horned owl that you hear actually comes in really close so that you, in fact, get to see them. And this almost never happens during an owl survey, but it does sometimes. So you would keep the same line for your first great horned owl, but in the next column, after the first minute of boreal owl calls, you would put an X and an S, and that means you both heard and saw it. Then you would add a new row for the saw-whet owl that you heard. So then you play your second round of boreal owl calls, you stop hearing the great horned owl, but now you hear 2 saw-whet owls going back and forth. So you would put another X for that first saw-whet owl, because you're hearing it again, and then you add a second line for another saw-whet owl. So the key thing here is 1 line per individual, not 1 line per species. You would never want to put 2X in that saw-whet owl line. And then let's say after your first saw-whet owl playback, you hear nothing. Okay, so you just leave your data sheet exactly as it is. And then right at the end, after your second round of saw-whet owl calls, you hear 2 great horned owls duetting back and forth, like in the example that I played. You suspect one is probably the same individual as before, based on where you heard it. And there is a certain amount of judgment that comes in with this. This is something that we understand. So you're having to guess based on where owls are, what the likelihood is you're hearing the same individual. But you hear this first saw-whet owl, but it's clearly joined by, first great horned owl, clearly joined by a second. You would add 1 more line to your data sheet. For the first great horned owl, you would add an X. So after the second saw-whet owl, you heard it again, and then you add another line for your new great horned owl and an X in the same column. That repeat column basically is asking whether you think it's the same owl as you heard at a previous stop. So for stop number 1, that's always going to be an empty column, because you haven't done any previous stops. But let's say at stop number 1, you hear a great horned owl quite far off to the north. And then let's say your next stop is to the north, 2 kilometers to the north. And at this stop, you hear a great horned owl quite far off to the south. There's a good chance that that is in fact the same owl that's being detected at 2 stops. We do space our stops so that we minimize the chances of that happening. But we just ask that if you think you're hearing the same owl from 2 different places, you note in the repeat column. So that's how you do the survey. I'm always happy to answer more questions about it. If you're interested, we're always looking for volunteers for the survey. So this brings us to the question of why do the survey? What do we learn from the survey? What can we learn from the citizen science of the Nocturnal Owl Survey? So the big thing is population trends. And to do this, you really need many years of data. But unlike our atlas, which is a 5-year effort, the Nocturnal Owl Survey is an ongoing survey. And so when you get to a point where the survey's been going on for 20 years, like in the Maritimes, as I said, you can see what's going on with populations over time. And so this is an analysis done for the 3 most common owl species in the Maritimes. And you can see for the barred owl there in the top row, in each of the maritime provinces, you are seeing an increase in population numbers. So that's a pretty strong signal that barred owls are doing okay. In contrast, for the great horned owl, you see a decreasing trend in all 3 maritime provinces. And then for the northern saw-whet owl, you don't really see any trend at all, except maybe in PEI. But one thing you should maybe, or that I would draw your attention to here, is this alternating cycle of a high population year, and then a low population year, high population year, and a low population year. So these guys seem to be on a 2-year cycle. And what's really cool is Nocturnal Owl Survey data can actually be used to sort of track or corroborate data about movement and population cycles. So saw-whet owls, I think I don't have my, there's a slide in between that should be here, which seems to have gone missing. These guys are eruptive. They tend to move where the food is. And at this migration monitoring station in Nova Scotia, grad students from the Université de Sainte-Anne noticed that they were seeing these 2-year cycles of numbers of owls coming through the banding station. So one year they'd get many, many, many owls. The next year they'd get many fewer owls. And there are a couple of reasons that this might be happening. It could just be that some years the prey populations are so fluctuating that you get more owls coming through the banding station. Or it could be variation in reproductive effort and survival between years. And so the grad students set out to answer this question by banding saw-whets at the banding station. And what they found is that in the years when they had a lot of owls, they also had a lot of young owls. So that's not the number of owls on the y-axis there. That's actually the ratio of older birds, so adult birds, to birds that had just hatched that summer. And you can see in the years where there are a lot of owls, you also have a much, much higher ratio of hatch-year owls to adults. And so in 2020, for example, they had 21 times more hatch-year owls than adults. And that pretty strongly suggests that this variation in numbers we're seeing is actually a result of variation in reproductive success. But they were able to corroborate that with Nocturnal Owl Survey data, because what they found is that when they looked at the Nocturnal Owl Survey data, they found that the abundance of saw-whets detected on Nocturnal Owl Survey routes was higher in years that showed that there's really high numbers of owls. So it's a really cool use of the data, and it actually was just published in a scientific journal. The owl data can also be really useful for considering land management. So in New Brunswick, we were able to compare barred owl population trends on public and private land. So you can see there the trend for owls detected on public land in purple and private land in orange. And much to, I think, everybody's surprise, it seems that populations are increasing more on private land than they are on public land. So that is a little bit of a surprise, but it could be because they depend on coyotes and large trees for nesting. And their presence or abundance kind of reflects the health of more mature, older forests. And it might suggest that prior forest management decisions have influenced populations. So some private owners have left large blocks of forest that are mature enough for barred owls. But on crown lands, forest management practices may limit the amount and quality of older stands. So they may be cutting down snags or older trees for safety reasons. So this is a really interesting result and something that I think they're interested in investigating further in the future. And it's also worth mentioning that because the presence of barred owls reflects the health of the forest ecosystem overall, they're what we consider an umbrella species. So by protecting barred owls, we can protect all the species that make use of that habitat. And I just have a couple more examples here. So we can look at habitat associations because we have data at a very fine level. So these are the owl survey routes in Prince Edward Island, which was once mostly forested, and now it's nearly half cleared for agricultural use. Much of the forest that's present is quite young, regrowing after having been harvested in the past. And so one of our former employees, Katie Studholme, analyzed owl survey data from Prince Edward Island between 2010 and 2013 and looked at detections and the various types of habitats. So she worked with this habitat map that you can see here, and she figured out what kind of habitats owls really liked. And so what she found isn't hugely surprising. She found that barred owls liked, as I said, the mature forest. They liked larger, less isolated forest patches. So remember, habitat fragmentation is a problem for owls. And they didn't mind residential developments. The great horned owls liked mature softwoods, so spruce or fir forest, and they liked those open wetland areas. So they're often found at forest edges. And then finally, the northern saw-whet owl were much more tolerant of younger forests. They are a smaller bird, but they also preferred larger, less isolated forest patches. So again, none of this is particularly surprising given what we know about these species and their habitat preferences. But it's really nice to have solid evidence to back that up. Okay, these are the last two uses of owl survey data, which I'd like to really emphasize because they have particular relevance to Newfoundland. So the Nocturnal Owl Survey is really important for putting rare species on the map. It's really difficult for scientists to study species that don't occur in any great density. So the boreal owl is a really good example. We need to know where boreal owls are breeding. We need to be able to really focus our conservation efforts on those areas. But a researcher attempting to study boreal owls would have a huge amount of ground to cover. So because we have a citizen science survey, we are able to cover large amounts of area, and it's really important to know where these rare species are. And that's particularly true of the of owl detections in Newfoundland and Labrador. Because we are putting together our first breeding bird atlas, we really want owls to be well represented in this atlas. And I will take a minute here just to say that the Nocturnal Owl Survey is really, really important for this. But also, if you just have an owl sighting, I know a lot of people have told me they've heard owls in their backyards or they've heard owls in a specific place. That's data that can be contributed to the breeding bird atlas, and that's really important data for us. And then that data can feed into environmental assessments, etc. And then this is the final application of owl data. And this is a bit of a speculative one, but something that I'm really hoping we can do with this data in Newfoundland and Labrador before 20 years. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to put our owl survey data to use in the near future. And that is, as I sort of briefly mentioned, tracking this expansion of saw-whet owls, which seem to be quite common here in Newfoundland and Labrador, even though, as you can see on that range map, Newfoundland is not considered part of their range. They do seem to be expanding here. And at the same time, we're hearing from birders, anecdotally, that boreal owls are less common. So some birders have wondered whether, because they use very similar niches, there might be competition between the two owls, and saw-whet owls are actually pushing boreal owls out. Another alternative is that boreal owls are shifting their range. They really like boreal forest. Perhaps they are moving northward with climate change. We don't know, but it's something that I'm really hoping we can use our owl survey data to explore. So I'm really interested to see where this goes in the next little while. Okay, so having filled you all in and hopefully convinced everyone that they want to volunteer for the survey, we're going to do our little knowledge test here. And Jenna's going to help me out with this because we are working on getting the polls straight. So Jenna, I'm going to play an owl song. If you could launch the polls, you guys tell me who you think you're hearing. And I can play it again. Okay, get those
showing up there, Catherine. I did launch it, but no answers are coming in.
Oh, I've got answers. You don't have
okay.
answers?
I don't have answers showing on mine, but if you have answers, that's all that matters.
Wow, we're really struggling these days with Zoom. Okay, so get your answers in. Jenna, maybe try clicking share poll, end poll, and share in a second, because I saw it when you did that before, even if you can't see the answers.
Yeah, just let me know when you want me to close it up.
All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds. Any final guesses? We've got great participation, 80%. Any more guesses on this guy? I'll play it once more. Get your guesses in. All right, we're going to end the poll. So Jenna, can you end it and share? Shared. Okay, I see the answers. Hopefully other people see the answers. In case you don't, 92% of you said great horned owl. You are indeed correct. You can hear the who's awake, me too, there. Oh, come on, there we go. There's a great horned owl. We did have a few people say barred owl. That would not be likely to be found in Newfoundland and Labrador. Very important species on the Maritime Survey. And in case you're wondering what barred owls say is, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Oh. Just in case you're wondering. I'm not a great owl, but I swear that's what they say. All right, we will go on to our next survey. And Jenna, I'm going to depend on you to share it again. So here we go. Play it again. Okay, this one's a bit trickier. We're seeing a wide variety. We've only got 60% participation. Get your guesses in now. Okay. Last few seconds. All right, Jenna, I will get you to answer the question and share the poll if you could. All right, so we've got a pretty even split here. We've got boreal owl coming in at the highest. 50% of you thought boreal owl. 30% of you thought northern saw-whet owl. A few people with short-eared owl, and none of the above as well. Totally reasonable answer, believe me. So this is, in fact, thank you, the boreal owl. It's a tricky one. So the short-eared owl, think of that almost monkey-like hooting. The northern saw-whet owl is the same series of toots, but very evenly spaced at the same pitch, instead of sort of that rush getting louder. So this is our boreal owl. I'll play him once more. He is the trickiest. All right, we will move on to our next question. So this is question 3. Who do we have here? And I'll play it again. All right, a few more seconds. Hit 70% participation. Let's see if we can hit 80. All right, 85% participation. I'll take it. Jenna, do you want to end the poll and share it? Okay, so another tricky one. But 53% of you got it right again. So this is, in fact, the northern hawk owl. This is the one that I said reminds me of a frog or possibly my little nephew pushing his little bubble popper machine. There's a real bubbly quality to it. It's kind of a funny sound. It is that repeated tooting of the saw-whet owl, so I can definitely see the confusion. Saw-whet owls would be a bit slower, more measured. Snowy owls have that single or double insistent loud hoot. None of the above, totally reasonable answer, but in this case, it was indeed the northern hawk owl. All right, 2 more questions. So this one, question 4, who do we have here? All right, we're at 70% participation. Get your answers in. Who do we have? Okay, so this is a tricky one, absolutely. Jenna, you want to share the answers? All right, so we have a guess of boreal, we have some guesses of saw-whet, we have short-eared owl coming in as the top contender, and then none of the above. And I have to apologize because this one is in fact a trick question. It is indeed none of the above. It is a Wilson snipe. This is a tough one, and I included it for a reason. It's because Wilson snipe make that same sort of crescendoing series of individual hoots, toots, kind of. They often sound a lot like boreal owls. So again, not the slow measured of the saw-whet owl, and not that almost monkey-like hooting of the short-eared owl. They do sound a lot like boreal owls. The way they make this sound, though, is not with their vocal cords, they make it with their feathers. So the sound you're hearing there is actually the wind passing over the modified outer tail feathers of a Wilson snipe when it does its display dive. So our Wilson snipe in Newfoundland and Labrador, well, in Newfoundland, sorry, they come back in sort of late April, early May. So if you do an early owl survey, you're not going to run into them. If, however, you push your survey till it gets a little bit warmer, and believe me, I do that, then these guys are going to be everywhere, making this sort of feathery version of a boreal owl song. Super tricky. Really good test of whether you've got a boreal owl or a Wilson snipe. Is the song moving? Because the song is made in flight, it's made by air passing over the feathers, the bird has to be moving to make it. On the other hand, boreal owls actually sit still and sing. And so if the song is coming from one place and not moving, you probably have a boreal owl. If the song is moving and you've got multiple individuals making the same noise in your area, you often can't see the snipe diving, but that's what you're hearing. All right, this is our last question. So who is this? People seem a lot more sure of this one. And I'll play it once more in case you didn't get enough of it the first time. And if you're starting to get a little bit irritated, you're on the right track. All right, Jenna, get your last minute answers in, and then I think Jenna's going to end the poll for us and share the answers. Okay, so almost 80% of you said northern saw-whet owl, and you are indeed correct. Tiny little truck backing up in the forest, or an axe being sharpened on a whetstone. Snowy owl, much lower hoots, much more space between hoots. Short-eared owl, again, think of that sort of monkey-like rapid series of hoots. Okay, so great job, especially because the majority of you got the great horned owl and the northern saw-whet owl, our most common owl species in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I think with a little bit more training, you're all ready to do the owl survey. Couple final points, just as we finish. Owls, of course, are not crazy about us approaching, and so it's really important to keep good owl etiquette in mind when you're doing the owl survey. So stressed owls, I think it's a little bit funny to say that they're wide-eyed because owls are always wide-eyed, but you can clearly see the difference between those two owl pictures. So, you know, if they are really focused on you, they're shuffling around, they're getting ready to fly, they're screaming at you, they're changing their vocalizations, they're stressed out. We want to keep them relaxed. We want to keep them asleep, ideally, for a lot of our nocturnal owl species. So when you're out doing an owl survey, make sure that you are giving them space. You're moving slowly, you're keeping your voice low, you're not feeding them, you're not using playback unless it's as part of the owl survey, just that one night a year. And make sure you download the permit to take with you if you're doing that. And finally, avoid flash photography. So owls don't like bright lights going off in their faces any more than people do. And that is where we will finish for tonight. So thank you all for attending and sticking with me a little bit late. You'll see there's the Atlas website there, but also the Owl Survey website. You can check that out. You can email me if you're interested in signing up for the survey, need help finding a route, need help establishing a route. I'm always happy to chat. And we'll take any questions now if there are any. Although I see that Jenna's been very ably answering them as we went along.
Thanks, Catherine. That was really interesting. We don't have any questions other than the one earlier about if males and females look the same, which you already answered. Yeah, and there's just thanks coming into the chat.
Excellent. All right. Well, everyone knows all about owls now, and we'll expect a whole flood of people signing up for the survey.
Oh, we have a question.
Okay.
Is it normal to be dive bombed by an owl?
If you are near its nest, yes. They are very ferocious defenders of their nest, particularly great horned owls. So yes, absolutely. And they are quite dangerous. So if you're being dive bombed by an owl, I would suggest leaving the area pretty quickly.
Good advice. That's the only question that we've had come in, so.
Okay. Must be quite an experience being dive bombed by an owl. I can't say I've had that one.
It must be. Margaret, you just asked if there's going to be a recording. Yes, we have been recording, and we'll have that available up on our website in the next couple of weeks. And we usually also send out an email that it's available there, so you'll be able to get that. Susan's asking, are great horned owls mating now?
They are probably done mating and more in the active breeding phase of things. So they are very early breeders. You will see them incubating eggs in kind of deep winter, February time-ish. So they are absolutely actively breeding right now.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so then we might be done for the evening then.